All right, lovely ladies and gentlemen of The Line. I am Jen Gerson, and I am here with my co-founder at The Line, Matt Gurney. We are recording this on October 11th, 2024 in the morning. God help us if anything happens. Today, we are going to start off with a little federal medley. We're going to talk about foreign interference. We're going to talk about, whether or not the Liberals are adrift. After the break, we're going to come back and explain why we think everybody in the Canadian Parliament needs to go out for a beer and a brawl. And then for our last segment, we're going to ask whether or not there is a joy, a political advantage in being crazy. That's it for us at The Line. Come check us out at www.readtheline.ca or stick with us after the break and we'll get into it.
This episode of The Line podcast has been brought to you by Unsmoke Canada. Canada can be a global leader in reducing the harm caused by smoking, but it requires actionable steps, including giving adult smokers the information they need to choose potentially less harmful alternatives. Learn more at unsmoke.ca.
All right, Matt, first a couple little bits of housekeeping. Firstly, housekeeping. You have improved your background.
Yes. So this is only noticeable for the people who are watching instead of listening, but I have stolen a variety of household objects. So for people who've been around the Line podcast since our experimental podcast age, I have an office area in my basement where I was recording the podcast because that's where my computer was. But now I'm using a laptop, and it just out of force of habit, because I'm a very simple creature and I lack imagination, it didn't occur to me that the fact I now had a laptop meant I could leave my office alcove. So I found a better place to do this recording. I've stolen a variety of household items to make it look beautiful. And here I am. So I request, pray. Last week, you were like begging the viewers to tell you you're pretty. Yeah. I don't care if you think I'm pretty. I just want you to like my backdrop because I stole the nightlight from my son's room.
It's very cool. And also the vibe it's giving is Aurora Borealis, which considering all of the solar storms we have had this week, I think is entirely thematically appropriate. Also,
I saw the Aurora for the first time in my life last night, and that was a bucket list item for me. But
it was very cool. We had an amazing storm in Calgary, I think on Wednesday? Yeah, it was just totally baller. It was amazing. So anyway, we're going to get into it. Matt, you have been watching the foreign...
Can I actually drop two more housekeeping items?
Please do.
A quick one, no written dispatch this weekend. We'll put that in the podcast notes. It's the long weekend, guys, and so we're not going to do it, and we're not going to foist it on you. And the last housekeeping note in relation to that, happy Thanksgiving, everybody. I hope you have a wonderful weekend.
Canadian Thanksgiving. I've also got a column coming up, so I got to focus on writing that. So... look, Matt, you were paying close attention to the foreign interference file this week. There was some parliamentary, which committee hearing was that? I forgot which committee was sitting on this one.
It wasn't a committee hearing. This one was the actual Foreign Interference Commission.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, my apologies.
Yeah. No, it's back underway. It's kind of been running in the background quietly without a ton of people noticing it for a while. When the Johnston report had come out, I wrote a column, and it ended up being one of our most successful ever columns, and I didn't expect that, but it ended up just completely taking off. I sat down and I read the Johnston report, and by the time the Johnston report had come out, the Johnston report was already controversial, right? Because Johnston himself had fucked off. He was done, and the Conservatives have been going after him for months. When I read the Johnston report, what I came away with was that one of the things the Liberals had done to themselves was that they'd put themselves into a situation where their best defense against allegations of malice or even outright treasonous behavior was incompetence. And Johnston is very polite, the eminent Canadian that he is. He's very polite about this, but he was writing in his report that the federal government didn't do a good job handling foreign interference. But they couldn't, because the federal government is so dysfunctional that it was almost impossible for them to do a good job. And this...
That tracks, by the way.
It completely does. It 100% does. And I went through in that column, I went through the Johnston report, and I dropped in a bunch of verbatim quotes of Johnston describing things that the federal government was doing or not doing in response to foreign interference. And there was this spectacular one. I'll just mention this one example where Johnston is just savaging them politely, but he's savaging them for being completely dysfunctional. And then as a note of fairness in his report, he adds, although he is given to understand that in recent weeks, the federal government had begun a process of reviewing its systems and its protocols to do better. And that was what jumped out at me, right? Because by the time Johnston was writing his report, we had had a pandemic that killed tens of thousands of Canadians. We'd had a European land invasion. We'd had a convoy. We'd had years of warning about foreign interference. We had had what had happened in the United States, increasing division and political radicalization there. And none of that had led the federal government to review its processes. The Johnston report was one they're like, we should probably take a look at this. In the convoy, when I was there, I was writing about the fact that local and provincial sources were telling me, we don't know what the fuck the feds are doing. Like, they are weeks behind the curve in understanding that. And then in the Johnston report, Johnson came out with like, the feds are so terrible at absorbing and analyzing information. And it's not that they're malicious. It's that they're incompetent to the point where they are incapable of effective action. And then the last couple of weeks...
better or worse? A debate for another day.
What I said in the column was that the Liberals' best defense is itself a confession. We're not working for China or India or Russia or whatever. We're just terrible at our jobs. Like, do you remember the fact that like it was discovered that Canada handles top secret classified materials being generated by our intelligence agencies or provided to them by our allies? And how we handle this, how we actually deliver that information to our key leaders.
Yeah, it's something to be with like huge binders full of information or something like that.
An undifferentiated binder.
Yeah.
With like no officer there to conduct a briefing.
Yeah.
So someone in the federal government has to go to a secure location. They're handed the binder full of material and they're not allowed to take notes, because if they took notes on what they were reading, they would be duplicating classified information.
Right.
And there is no process in place to make sure that anyone actually reads the binders. And there are no processes in place to make sure anyone actually does anything with the information that they have read.
Hopefully there's like an executive summary at the front or something, but something tells me that nobody thought to do that. Yeah, with that, which in and of itself is not ideal.
We also found out that like the Minister of Public Safety was not given electronic access to like the classified emails.
Right, yes. I mean, why would the Minister of Public Safety require classified access to classified emails or electronic access to classified? So like just the repair, they were printing out the classified emails and putting them in the undifferentiated binder, which he then had to take to like the secure location to read without a briefing?
If there was based on my understanding of the Johnston report, and people who have more experience with this can correct me if I'm wrong, but based on my understanding of the report, there is a critical classified secure data network that some members of the Canadian government can use to transmit like highly classified material, but the email used by the Minister of Public Safety was not one of them. It was for like more like background and internal use only.
But do you really want like elected officials having access to classified information, or would you just prefer the technocratic bureaucrats to have that?
Well, as I wrote at the time, I was actually pretty okay with Marco Mendocino not having access to critical information, but I don't think we should design the entire system around the incompetency of one particularly unimpressive minister. We need to design the system on the assumption that the next guy will be reasonably competent.
It would be really, really interesting to me to find out whether or not Canadian legislators in sensitive positions have an easier time getting access to sensitive material in America versus Canada. And the reason why
undoubtedly they do.
The reason why I ask that is because the two of us have been in journalism long enough to realize that the second there's an American connection to any story we're working on,
you can get the data.
Glory from above, because you can actually like call a random police officer in the United States and they'll get back to you promptly and talk to you about what's going on. Like I've gotten interviews with special agents in the FBI about stuff that I'm working on just randomly. They're like, sure, we can completely hook that up for you. Let us try and do that for you in a timely manner. No problem. Or
The
like you
longest
can
I've
talk
had to
to
wait is a day.
like you can you go and talk to the DEA or something, and they're like, yes, we'll tell you all about the drug trafficking that's happening across the border. No problem. We'll give you details and great details. That would be fantastic. And they don't even.
And please refer to our recently published report of
Oh,
unclassified information.
and they don't even like forward you to comm specialists. The comm specialist will connect you to the actual person. It's just it's revelatory. It's a totally different world down there, man. And it just every
You
time
deal
I
with
have
a Canadian official and you're told, like, you'll email them and they'll get back to you. They'll either say, what's your deadline? And then they'll ignore whatever you tell them, but they'll ask. Or they'll say to you, well, what's the purpose of your inquiry? I've literally gotten to the point where I've said, the purpose of my inquiry is I'm a goddamn citizen. Tell me the info.
yeah, and then they'll get back to you only in email format, quoted by a ministry spokesperson that is some kind of chat AI thing that's been gone through 14 different levels of vetting. And we know that that's literally true because there are people who have FOIP'd or done
Their own emails.
They've done access to information requests on their own requests, like their own requests for information, so that we can see exactly what the process is to get a response to a basic inquiry. Basic. Just I want to understand. I mean, the last time I had this experience was the Jasper fires. Like, I want to have a basic understanding of like this particular fire smart program. We're not talking about top tier classified information. Basic functioning of democracy level shit. All right. Low tier shit. And it's 20, 30, 40 levels of back and forth emails, senior sign-offs to get anything, and usually the information that comes back to you is useless. Like it's non-information. It's a statement.
What I've often had is the experience of, hi, I would like to know how many widgets we built between this date and this date. And then they'll be like, hey, Matt, what's your deadline? And I'll be like, Monday. And they'll be, hey, what's the purpose of the request? Fuck you, I'm asking.
Well,
and they're like, okay. And then like a week later, you'll get, hi, Matt, we were responding to your request of how many widgets were built between the dates of X and Y. Here is our statement. This government is committed to the building of widgets. That is why over the last 3 years, we have invested X millions in the construction of widgets. And then they repeat it in French, and then they wish you a nice day.
And this coming from governments, by the way. And by the way, it's not just the federal government that's this bad. It's local governments have become this bad. It's municipal governments have become this bad. It's local cop shops have become this bad. How should I say this? We have created a very... While we have a government that's out there explaining the importance of journalism to a functioning democracy, we've created an accountability and a transparency culture in the society at all levels of government that is not functionally democratic anymore. It's so closed, it's so non-transparent, it's so impossible to get even the most basic information out anymore that we can't function as a democracy with the current status quo. And we're not functioning as a democracy. So I really want governments to spend a lot less time fixating on things like disinformation and misinformation on Twitter, and a lot more time fixating on how do we make our own processes more open and accountable so that people can report on them more easily. And nobody's going to do that. So I despair of our increasingly technocratic, half-baked democracy.
That's almost bang on with what the latest developments were this week. So the issue this week at the foreign interference inquiry that has been eating up a lot of bandwidth, and was what made me think of my old Johnson report column. There had been a warrant request by CSIS. CSIS had requested a warrant to surveil Canadians. And this required ministerial approval. The public safety minister at the time was Bill Blair. This was during the pandemic, so there were some work from home, telecommuting disruptions.
Sure.
CSIS has said the typical response time for a warrant request that requires ministerial approval is between 4 and 8 days. And in general, in the period under consideration by the inquiry, Minister Blair was pretty much bang on in that. He was receiving and he was quickly approving warrant requests in a matter of days. The reason this gets interesting is because one warrant in particular was sent to Minister Blair via his chief of staff, and nothing happened on it for 54 days. And CSIS was growing frustrated and flagging it and raising it. And now I don't know what was in that warrant. I do know that it has been reported, including by the Globe and Mail, that the warrant was targeting a politician named Michael Chan, who has longtime political ties to the Liberal Party. Again, I cannot confirm that. So any eager lawyers out there, I'm just telling you what the Globe has said. Go bother them. The implication of this is, again, to state the obvious, that the Liberals slow-walked a warrant targeting one of their own, or at the very least took their sweet time when considering what to do about it. Maybe they had to kind of think about it from a political messaging standpoint before they got around to signing it. Now, Blair, for his part, has denied this. Blair has said he signed the warrant within hours of it being put in front of him. And there's no evidence yet to contradict that. And as you've noted, Jen, we're recording this on Friday morning, and Minister Blair is going to testify again in the afternoon. Maybe there's a bombshell development. That's the danger of podcasting. Things can happen after you record. But his chief of staff at the time testified this week and was asked repeatedly what was with that 54-day delay, and there were no answers forthcoming. You know, there was a lot of words and a lot of talking, but I did not come out of that testimony any better informed about the 54-day delay. And one of the other issues that came up relatedly was a dispute between CSIS and, again, Minister Blair's office, because those binders, those infamous binders, CSIS was, like, Blair has said he was not receiving certain briefings, and his office has said, well, we weren't receiving them from CSIS. And CSIS has been saying, we were generating them and sending them along to you guys. And the minister's office has denied this. So the issue...
Could it have been just a genuine screw-up?
Sure.
Or have we considered the possibility that perhaps some element within the Liberal government was protecting Mr. Chan from a rampant bout of anti-Asian racism?
Reportedly, Mr. Chan, our lawyers want me to point out, but
Mr. Chan.
Yes, possible. So I don't know. And what comes away, what I walked away from all this with was just thinking of that column I wrote about the Johnston report, right? Because the Liberals basically right now, on the particular matter of the warrant, there are two plausible explanations for this. The first is the political interference one, that the Liberals did not want this warrant to proceed, or they had to slow walk it while they figured out a strategy. That obviously would make them look awful. It would suggest or reveal that they had been prioritizing their own political welfare over and above that of the Canadian people.
You shocked.
Shocked. Yeah, this is my shocked face.
Wow, they would never.
The only other really plausible explanation, again, it brings me right back to that Johnston column, incompetence. What happened to the warrant for 54 days? Oops. Darn. And then there's also the issue of CSIS, the public safety minister, and the public safety minister's office don't know what was happening with the classified briefings. So there certainly is evidence that would support the incompetence thesis. But again, for the second time in a year, on national security matters, the Liberals are offering up as a defense what is itself a stunning indictment. They are telling the world we're too bad at our jobs to be malicious.
Maybe CSIS is actually operating for the Conservatives, and they're just going after liberally well-connected people for no reason.
CSIS is working for Elon Musk and U.S. hedge funds to spread right-wing disinformation.
Clearly. On that note, and subscribe to the line. That's www.readtheline.ca if you haven't already. Matt, before we go to the break, you wanted to talk about a Star story.
Yeah.
Okay, that just came out today.
Yeah, it's a logical connection to this. The Toronto Star, God bless him, Tana McCharles and Alex Bollingal have done it again. They've done one of these stories the Star does from time to time. And I say this with gentle teasing to my colleagues at the Star, but I admire what they're doing, but I'm going to tease them slightly for this. It's one of those, the Toronto Star spoke with 700,000 liberals. Here's what they had to say. But no, look, the Star has spoken with not quite hundreds of thousands, but dozens, apparently, of liberal insiders, including members of the caucus. And the question basically that the Star is putting to them, and they're putting it politely, I'm sure, but basically the question is, what the fuck? Like,
Why?
the Conservatives are murdering you guys in the poll. The last wave of polling, as you've seen, Jen, is showing that the NDP is moving into a tie or starting to beat the Liberals in some areas.
I believe I warned them that was going to happen.
And the premise of the Star article basically is, why are you guys not doing anything? And the insidery guys talking to the Star are basically telling them, I don't know. Like, there's in my recent October 7th column, I referenced you and a term that you invented that I have often used, which is stun-fucked. And you described the entire Canadian government as being stun-fucked after the convoy, and that was part of why we spent weeks with them being like, what do we that was the Canadian federal response for 2 weeks of the convoy. That's kind of the response right now of the Liberal Party. Incoherent gibberish.
Babbling sounds? Yeah. Okay. So I have a theory as to how that can happen.
Go.
Essentially, the gibberish sounds indicates to me that they are discovering or coming to terms with the fact that their theory of the case is wrong. Right? So for the last year,
I think I know what you mean, but go on.
Their polling has been collapsing. Things have not been going well. Their theory for their own inability to connect with Canadians is fundamentally that actually our governance is great. We're doing a really good job. We're making we're delivering on promises that we made to Canadians. And the problem that we have had is that we have failed to effectively communicate our awesomeness to the Canadian public appropriately. And that was their theory of the case. Clearly, the polling results is a result of, at best case scenario, failed comms on our parts, worst case scenario, disinformation efforts by bad faith actors who want to portray or undermine our awesomeness in favor of this batshit crazy mega conservative Canadian base. That's been effectively, I think that's been their theory of the case. So their response to that theory of the case was, well, then the answer is we have to double, triple, and quadruple down on our comms strategy. We're going to hire people in the Prime Minister's office to fight back, just like the Conservatives do on Twitter. We're going to make sure that the Prime Minister is doing all the right podcasts with all the cool kids, including Stephen Colbert and the Freakonomics guys. We're going to just make sure that as likable Prime Minister that people would really like if they just saw more of him.
If they only knew what he had done for you.
Yeah, they're going to go harder, harder, harder. And the end result of that has been the polling numbers have gotten dramatically worse. I mean, I think one of the polls that we've seen shows that the Conservatives are now looking at 46% support, which is, by the way, 3 or 4 years ago, the kind of polling that people were saying was mathematically impossible, right? That is mathematically impossible for the Conservatives to be polling that level of support in a first past the post system. There's no way they're going to get above 39. 39 was where they essentially had maxed out. They're now at 46, and there appears to be no sign of that going down. If they manage to eat block support, or at least some block support, they could be at 50. And in a first past the post system, we're now not even talking about thumping majority. I mean, thumping majority was back there. We're now talking about absolute historic, mathematically impossible landslide. We're now in the category of, or we're staring down the barrel of a category of, one of my favorite meteorologists was talking about Hurricane Milton and saying this hurricane has reached the mathematical limits of what is possible in this part of the world. In the atmosphere. Yeah. So analogizing that to politics, where we are right now, and always with the caveat that things can radically change quickly in politics, but that's kind of where we're at, where the Conservatives are a storm building to the mathematical limits of what's possible in the Gulf of Mexico. So the conservatives the liberals are looking at this, tracking the models and going, well, fuck, I don't know how to respond to that. They're coming to terms with the fact that their theory of the case is flawed.
Yeah.
And they're coming to the end of the possibility of, if we just do it harder, it will correct. It'll self-correct, which means that you're going to have to go back a couple steps, reevaluate the theory of the case, and come to terms with your own failures and problems. Or they're just going to be like, those things they put outside used car lots, the big
the flailing guys,
the flailing guys, or they're just going to go like this into the next election. By the way, I'm actually kind of happy with either option, because either option is great for me as a writer. I mean, I'm
lot
here
to write about.
I'm here for the fodder. I'm here for the content fodder. So you guys do whatever you feel you need to do. But that kind of response strikes me as a coming to terms with reality problem.
I like the way you've described that. I think theory of the case is elegant. I've described it a little bit differently, but I think we're talking about the same things, and your way may be more elegant than mine. But there's
you just like my interpretive dance. Let's be really honest.
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. More than I can say. I think one of the ways I've described it is that I think the liberals have committed a category error. And a category error is kind of this philosophical notion of sometimes you can ask a question so badly, arriving at the correct answer is impossible. And I think part of what the liberals have done, because they're not stupid, they've looked at the numbers and they're looking at other indicators, fundraising and things like that, and they know that they have a problem. And they are putting their very best minds on answering the question of what that is not our fault can explain this.
That's about right. Yeah.
And they're working really hard to answer the question of what that is not our fault can explain this. And I think they have asked a question so badly that it is impossible for them to answer it or to get to the correct answer. They keep coming to answers, and it's kind of what you were saying a minute ago, when the question is what that is not our fault can explain this, you get yourself into the situation where you can come up with an answer like, we needed the prime minister on more late night US talk shows.
Mm-hmm.
You can come up with an answer like, we need a school food program. You can come up with an answer of, we need Karina Gould to be scrappier in the house. And like, I understand why they're coming to those answers. Like, I think they're wrong, but I think I understand the internal thought process that is bringing them there. But I think what's also happening, and it comes up in the Star article and it comes up in other stuff we've already podcasted and written about, there are members of the Liberal Party who are not asking the question of what that is not our fault is happening. They're asking the correct question, which is what is happening. And I think the ones who are asking the question of what is happening are concluding, we are a deeply unpopular government with significant internal structural problems. Our feedback loops are broken. We are not responsive to change. We are old and in desperate need of renewal. And having reached the correct conclusion, they're looking around, they're looking at who's in the PMO, they're looking at what the PMO is doing and saying, and these are the MPs who are announcing that it's time to spend more time with their family. These are the MPs who are the staffers, chiefs of staff, who are deciding to pursue opportunities in the private sector. These are the 1/3 of the Liberal caucus that did not show up at the cabinet retreat. And the Star article gets into the psychology of it, but it also gets into, and I recommend everybody go out and read it, gets into the logistics of it too. And one of the things that's coming up logistically is the Liberals are not campaign ready. Like they
How is it possible that the Liberals are not campaign ready? That is not.
They can probably get there, but like there are things that a party in their situation, just hypothetically, like I'm not even talking specifically about them, but you are an incumbent minority government in a Westminster parliamentary system. You were way down in the polls and you've just lost your confidence and supply agreement partner. What are some things you ought to be doing? And the Star article goes through them. You should have a campaign chair in place, ready to go. In fact, the Liberals just lost Jeremy Broadhurst, who was their campaign chair. You should have ads running that are aggressively going after the guy who's in the lead. The Liberals are not currently advertising, although the Star notes they are currently planning, they've just rolled out some dental care ads, and they want to do some carbon rebate ads. Okay. They are not working hard to get candidates lined up for like 338 candidates, every riding in the country ready to go. They're not doing that stuff. And at a certain point, whether it's the theory of the case or what that is not our fault has gone wrong, or if it's stun fuckification, I honestly don't know. But one of the things that might explain all of this is sort of a top-down omni theory, is that to an extent that they might not be prepared psychologically to admit yet, have they given up? Like, just think about that for a second here. How much of what we've been seeing from our government in recent months, including a third of caucus not showing up at the retreat, including MPs and ministers having weird eruptions about the atmosphere exploding if you take a road trip. Like, are we looking at 350 odd people who are all on their own little personal emotional journey to the acceptance phase because they've given up? Is that the easiest explanation for what we're seeing?
Probably. But the reason why I was giving you really, really funny faces while you were saying that is that now I'm stun-fucked. I don't understand how, if you're the Liberal Party, you haven't started on election preparation over the summer. Like, you had a summer to do that. What? I don't understand.
The only possible rational explanation is that they are confident in their big red machine ability to do that quickly.
Okay, that I can see there. But then, how do you explain the weird spasms that we've been witnessing? And on that note, I think that we should put a pin in that. Say like and subscribe.
Yeah.
Check out and subscribe to readtheline.ca for more of our scintillating analysis and interpretive dance. And we're going to come back to our next segment, talking about whether or not the entire Parliament requires a beer, a brawl, and then a hug.
This episode of the Line Podcast has been brought to you by Unsmoke Canada, which is dedicated to helping Canadians who are looking to quit smoking understand the full range of options available. Despite decades of government programs and regulations, today nearly 5 million Canadian adults smoke cigarettes. Adult smokers who choose to continue to smoke should be aware that other options exist. Right now, accessing information about these options is heavily restricted in Canada. While not risk-free, alternatives such as heated tobacco and vaping products provide a potentially less harmful choice than cigarettes. Cigarettes burn tobacco, resulting in smoke that contains 6,000 harmful chemicals that are associated with smoking-related disease and death. Heated tobacco and vaping products have the potential to significantly reduce this risk. Health agencies around the world are now considering these alternatives to help end smoking. Updated laws can help adult smokers better understand the full range of options available, including the relative risks of these products. Millions of Canadians smoke cigarettes. Technology exists that can help change that, but policymakers need to take actions. Learn more about how a smoke-free future can be achieved at unsmoke.ca.
So that was a nice, fun wrap-up of all things federal. We've still got some federal stuff to work our way through. You and I have both looked at the PBO's new carbon tax numbers, and there were a lot of numbers, and I felt sad, and I closed the tab.
No one's coming to us for like in-depth and numerically based economic analysis, man. They're here for the vibes. We're fine with that.
Maybe we find, fuck it, let the hub do it. The other thing that kind of jumped out at we had, what we always do, Jen, is like, I come with a bunch of story ideas, you come with a bunch of story ideas, we put them all together, and we pick which ones we're going to do, but also what order we're going to do them in here. We had like 5 federal stories on our list this week that we wanted to do. Some
6,
were yours
I think,
and some
right?
were mine.
Yeah.
But we kind of realized that there are two themes that we can group them into. The first one we just did, which was general federal update and medley. The other one was sort of signs that all of these people need to go home. And we have talked about this before. And I know people will say we're stumping for the Conservatives on this one because the Conservatives would win an election held today, and they probably would.
Yeah, but they're probably also going to win an election held in October of 2025. So whatever.
We're at the point where one of the questions I keep asking myself is, are these guys doing actual harm to the country and probably to themselves, spiritual, psychic harm by continuing to show up to work every day? And there was an interesting eruption this week in the House, and I don't want to make too much out of it because it's silly, and I don't want to platform the silly. But Nate Erskine-Smith of Beaches East York, a Liberal MP, self-described maverick. Well, no, it's not self-described, oft-described maverick. And increasingly podcast host, which we might talk about in a moment.
Oh, we will.
He was in a a committee meeting, and things got heated, and it resulted in Erskine-Smith in the middle of a committee meeting basically saying, "This is bullshit. This is bullshit. You're impugning my integrity." Like, what was it? Shut the fuck up, or what the fuck is this, or something like that. An F-bomb and a couple of bullshits in the middle of the committee meeting. I'm not going to dissect the entrails of the committee meeting, but I listened to it. I went back and I listened to it. Do I get why Nate lost it? A little bit. The Conservatives were poking him. They were needling him. I get it. But Nate, for all his mavericky ways, he's a pretty level-headed guy. And there's a lot of stuff I don't agree with him on. A lot of stuff, increasingly of late. But he's pretty chill. And I know him a little bit personally. So it's not just a guy I've watched. I'm not close to him personally, but I know the guy a little bit. I have admired him for his level head. And if we're at the point where he's dropping F-bombs in committee meetings, it really just speaks to me, something that you and I have spoken about already. They all need to go home.
Well, okay, so let's go step back for a moment here, because I don't necessarily want to adjudicate the actual fight like I'm some kind of principal at a third-rate parliamentary high school. So I'm not going to say whether or not who was right or wrong, but there was one shot that the Conservatives did take at Nate, where they said something to the effect of, and I think you're trying to pull up the quote here, maybe if you, Nate, had bothered to read your briefing notes as opposed to preparing for your next career as a podcast host, you'd blah, 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 blah. And Nate kind of took umbrage at this point. I also think that they openly said that he lacked integrity, which to me struck me as unparliamentary and probably not becoming. I would say this, however, is that Nate's very popular among journalists, and Nate's very popular among journalists both left and right, because he's kind of like one of these smarter dudes who's never really been in cabinet, and has always been
relatively straight shooter, accessible.
Relatively straight shooter, relatively accessible. Also, compared to a lot of other people in the in the Liberal caucus, has managed to avoid a lot of the partisan brainworms by being kind of both in and out. Kind of lives in the straddling place.
To his credit, I would say.
So yeah, to his credit, absolutely. So nobody likes to give Nate too hard a time. But I would say this, Nate, you are preparing for your next career, and you're doing it on the taxpayer dime. He is. He literally is. I haven't talked
with him personally about this, but looking at his recent podcasts, I have certainly wondered if he's preparing to launch a career as a podcaster once his political life ends, and he has already said he's not running again.
He's got a set. He's doing a thing. You can't convince me that the podcast shit that he's creating, I'm not saying shit, it's actually quite good, but the podcast vibe that he's creating is not something that he is, I don't believe that it's something that he's doing solely to communicate the government's message to his constituents. I think that there's a degree of personal careerism involved here for him. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing per se. People transition in and out of the MP's office. He's experimenting with a different format. That's great. I'm not, I'm also going to be conscious of the fact that people will criticize us for criticizing him, because if he comes into the podcast space full time, he'll be competition with us. Although he kind of won't be, because he'll be coming at it from a different vibe. But for as far as I'm concerned, look, more the merrier. More the merrier, Nate. Welcome
May a
aboard.
thousand flowers bloom.
May a thousand flowers bloom. Honestly, I'm cool with it. I'm cool with him being a podcaster. That's great. Where I do think he does deserve some criticism, and where he's managed to avoid some criticism, is the fact that he is establishing this on a taxpayer salary, using, at least some taxpayer resources that account for his time, at a minimum. I don't know how much of that salary is going into his set design or his production design. I don't know how much of that's coming out of his constituency budget. I don't know. But, you're doing that.
I don't know if any is, for the record.
No, I don't. But you're going to, I don't necessarily have a problem with him doing it, but you can't expect to do stuff like that and not expect to take a shot every now and again.
I've had the same thought that you've had. Okay, I know what Nate's doing next, because he's already announced he's not running federally again. He ran for the leadership of the Ontario Liberal Party and lost. So he's got the other thing is too. I mean, two related points. First of all, if this is his plan, I actually probably like it more than a lot of what I see, which is that MPs vanish into like the comms, GR, or lobbying world.
Absolutely. Completely. I would much rather have all of these people become podcasters after their time in politics, as
spilling the tea
spilling the tea. Like we'd have a better, more functional democracy if these guys could come over to our side after spending some time there. Like I have no problem with that.
The only other point, Jen, I'd raise though related to that is that it might not be as explicit or clear as a definitive break. He might podcast for a while, do other things, because I don't know, you and I know podcasting is a hard way to make a living. So I don't know what he's planning to do, but even if it doesn't become his full-time gig, if he continues it for a while, it's not a bad way to keep your name in the headlines as you possibly mull a return to politics at some point.
Absolutely. And look, using your time on the MP's dime to sort of build your personal profile and establish experience in a more media space, I don't think is necessarily wrong, but you are doing it using taxpayer resources, the major one being the taxpayer resource of your salary and time.
That might be the only one, but that's still not nothing.
And that might be the only one, but it's still not nothing. So, you can also make the argument that okay, well, yeah, but if he had a hobby on the side, you could argue that he was doing that on taxpayer time. And I'm like, yeah, totally, which is why I don't really have a problem with it. Like, if MPs go golfing on the weekends, are they doing that on the taxpayer dime? I mean, you can make that argument in the same way, and that can be taken to an absurd position. I think it can be. So I don't have an issue with him doing it per se.
You know, it might be a weird way of putting it, Jen, but it's sort of like an MP announcing they're not going to run again, but they're going to remain as MP, and they're also going to night school.
Yeah, that would be, I think, another way to put it.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, but are you going to night school so that you can better serve your constituents as an MP, which would be the kind of
something when you're no longer an MP.
Right. I mean, and also there's a private sector equivalency to this, because if you go to a private sector job and you go to your job and say, I need some extra flexibility or some extra time or even extra resources in order to go back to business school so that I could be better prepared to say take a managerial role in this company, there are actually lots of companies that would be like, great, we'll pay your tuition, or great, we'll give you time off,
do your MBA.
You go do your thing. So they're fine with that. What they're not fine with that is you saying, I'm going to go back to school, go back to night school, as you say, to go do a degree in something completely unrelated to my job, and I'm expecting you guys to support me in my personal ambitions. I think that that's a really good analogy. And most corporations would say, yeah, no, you want to go do night school, that's completely on you, and we're not paying your tuition for that, and we're not going to give you hours for that. You need to completely do that on your own time. So, it gets you into some gray zones, I think.
My gut feeling, and I don't know, and I'm being explicitly clear, I don't know. My gut feeling is that Nate's smart enough not to have used taxpayer resources to fund the podcast, But the fact that he is a sitting MP while launching a media career, I don't know. I don't think I have a problem with it, but it's something that I don't think I object to the Conservatives bringing up either.
I think that that's right. Like it's a brave new world, and I think a lot of the black and white streams that we used to live in are getting muddied, and I think that that's fine. But yeah, I think that's my position as well.
It's
anyway,
a reverse Sabrina Mado.
It's a reverse Sabrina Mado.
The only thing I'll add, Jen, a final thought on this, Nate, for what it's worth, if you end up hearing this, you're pretty good at it.
Yeah,
keep it up.
Keep doing it.
I think he's a pretty good podcaster.
I think he's a pretty good podcaster too. There's a career in it for him, so I'm not discouraging him.
You want to talk? So yeah. So I mean, we mainly brought this up in the concept of like none of them are draping themselves in glory, and I think they all need a break. How many more times?
The break from the 1 month they've been back at work. The break from the 1 month they've been back at work.
Looking this morning, Nate dropping an F-bomb in a committee has polarized people into perfectly predictable silos of how dare he besmirch the reputation of our parliament by such language, and others who are like, fuck yeah, fight back. Glad somebody finally said it. None of this is good. None of this is healthy. None of this is... I get, Nate, they prodded you. I get it, buddy. But if we're at the point where we're F-bombing each other in a committee, I think this government's run its course.
Yeah.
You want to talk with me about Melanie Joly, another interesting eruption this week.
Another interesting example of the government running its course. So I don't want to necessarily over-report this because this quote we're hearing secondhand from Thomas Mulcair. So Thomas Mulcair has claimed...
Talk about political media transitions.
That's right. So Thomas Mulcair, I believe he was on a CTV panel. I'll double check that.
He has some ongoing commentary role with CTV.
Now, he said publicly, so again, don't sue us, go sue Thomas. He has said publicly that he challenged Melanie Joly on her sort of flip-floppy stance on the Hamas-Israel stuff. He was appalled by the lack of clarity and direction coming out of the liberal government on it. And according to him, Joly responded to him and said something to the effect of, and I'm paraphrasing, Mulcair, have you seen the demographics in my writing? With the clear implication of that being, I can't come out with what Mulcair would consider to be a principle or clear take on Israel or Hamas because I have to consider the people who are voting for me. The implication for that being that there are lots of Muslims in my riding, and so therefore I have to pander to them. Now, again, this is hearsay. This is Mulcair reporting on Joly's comment. Joly hasn't denied it. I don't believe Joly's denied it.
In the immediate aftermath of October 7th, and anyone who's a regular listener of this podcast will know that I'm not carrying liberal water. In the immediate aftermath of October 7th, the Prime Minister, in particular, struck, I think, exactly the right tone. And I think if we were to go back and look at the coverage, I think you and I began to call it at the time. There was a palpable tone shift. And it kind of came exactly when we knew it was going to come. Everybody had an easy time sympathizing with Israel before Israel did anything about October 7th. Mm-hmm. The moment they did, the moment it began, the government's position remained, I think, appropriately balanced and fair. And I say this as a pretty friggin' pro-Israel guy. I was looking at the Canadian government statements and statements from Joly and the Prime Minister and going, yeah, okay, what they're saying is fair. And then it began to change. And you and I, at the time, about probably 10 or 11 months ago, we were very quick to go, you know what? They're reading the internal polling. And they're, Liberals, big tent party, right? They were eventually going to have to make an electoral choice between the irreconcilable desires of their Jewish voters and their Muslim voters. And I think the Liberals looked at the demographics of the ridings.
I think it's actually a little bit more nuanced than that. My suspicion is, what I would note is that when we started to notice those tone shifts, they started to try to strike in mutually incomprehensible positions to please everyone. Right? So it was, and sometimes differing statements in like the same day even. It's like we support the international court's position on Israel committing genocide, but
Which
we
while
don't.
we also
Well,
support
we also
Israel, yeah.
support Israel. And in the end result, not only do I think that they alienated a lot of people who are Jewish in this country and a lot of people who were supportive of Israel in this country, they also wound up alienating those very demographics. They alienated a lot of people who were strongly supportive of Palestine. So it was one of those situations where there's no political, there's no easy statement. There's no political winning in any state, in any position they are. Like, and the end result of as well is you can look at Jolie's statements over the course of the last year, and you can find what you want to find. If you want to find strong Israel support to get angry about, you can find it in her statements. And if you want to find,
That's what they're doing, right?
yeah. And if you
All
want
the
to find,
statements are designed to be generic enough that they can be spliced. The same statement will be spliced, and this is the segment we send to the Muslim voters, and this is the segment we send to the Jewish voters. Absolutely.
And then the conservatives can take a particular splice and be like, Jolie is the Hamas loving, blah 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 blah. So it's. I have
and the NDP will be splicing it and saying this government continues to support Israeli genocide. Yeah.
Yeah. I have no idea. Literally have no idea what Melanie Jolie honestly believes on Israel and Gaza, and I would not even hazard a guess. I have no idea what the Liberal government and the top people at the top of the Prime Minister's office actually genuinely honestly believe on any of this stuff. Would not hazard a guess. I can tell you with confidence that there are elements within the Liberal base and party that are very strongly pro-Palestinian and have real issues with what Israel's doing. And I can tell you that there are some vocal members within the Liberal Party who have real issues with that. I did an interview with Anthony Housefather a couple of months ago. He's probably one of the strongest pro-Israel voices in the Liberal caucus. So what you have here is a House very divided on a very emotional issue, on a very contentious issue. And as a result, I have no idea whether or not, as a corporate and institutional entity, the Liberal Party has any idea what it really believes.
Yeah. We've talked about this here before, but one of the things we've observed is that the NDP and the Conservatives both have the luxury of being clearly on one side or the other of the fault line that runs through Canadian public opinion.
Yeah.
And the Liberals have the misfortune of having that fault line in Canadian public opinion going right through their voter base.
The other difference I would also point is that the supporters right now, the remaining supporters of the Liberal Party, skew old.
Yeah.
And the olds are more likely to be supportive of Israel than the youngs. So, do you double down on that support and risk alienating the youngs? Well, that would be furthering a trend for them. But the other problem, the flip side to that, is that I'm not sure that even the age demographics split as well as liberals would like when you look at where support for Israel is concentrated. Like if you're pulling a lot of your support from like boomers in Midtown Toronto, that's a tough one. So, it's an interesting question. The other question, of course, is whether or not Jolie is setting herself up to be a replacement for Trudeau, whether or not she's setting herself up to run her own leadership race, and what kind of support that she would need to do that. I mean, one of the big sort of subplots and sub-theories of Canadian politics right now is if Trudeau were to step down, or is one of the reasons why Trudeau won't step down, because he knows very well that a leadership race, the Liberal leadership race, would not appoint a Mark Carney, but would almost certainly be hijacked by people who had strong views on Palestine in order to entrench someone who was strongly in support of Palestine and all of its machinations. That could very easily push the party into a fringe territory, depending on who they selected and who they chose. But it's clear where a lot of the emotion and enthusiasm for Canadian politics is right now, and it's in this conflict. It's invested in this conflict. So,
you were more nuanced than me a minute ago. Let me be slightly more cynical than you.
Okay.
I also think something that's probably happening in the background for some of the Liberals, and it's not clear to me yet, we've talked about this before, who's in the bunker? Like, who are the ones who genuinely still think they're about to pull a rabbit out of their hat and win this thing?
Mm-hmm.
And who are the ones who know they're going to lose and are everything they're doing, a little bit like we were wondering about Nate with his podcast, how many public statements being made right now for political purposes or governance purposes are being made with a mind that person's next job interview?
Yeah.
Like in the back, I wonder how many cabinet ministers right now or parliamentary secretaries, whatever, or how many Liberal MPs right now are sending out tweets, and they're sending them out, again, nominally representing the business of state, but they're also thinking, this is going to look great when I apply to this firm, or I better not say this because that's going to get brought up at the vetting meeting when I go to this.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's a lot, but I think it's more than zero. And this is what brings me right back to what I was telling you a minute ago, Jen, we were talking about with Nate dropping F-bombs. My message, again, specifically to Liberals, but I think to all parliamentarians is, does this get better for you over the next 12 months?
No.
Sorry. Are your personal interests suited by an election in a month or an election in 12 months? That's the question I pose. And I think you and I have been dinging the Liberals a bit here, not even in the interest of fake balance, but of actual balance. You and I both rolled our eyes pretty hard at something the Conservatives are doing this week. Mm-hmm. Would you like to tell me about Richard Gray?
Oh, okay. So again, I don't want to get into the CTV stuff again, because I think we've done that segment to death. Anybody who has not paid attention to it, good for you. But essentially, I think 3 weeks ago now, during the first confidence vote motion, CTV ran a botched story that effectively tried to frame the confidence motion around the Canadian entitlements that might be lost if the government fell, and particularly the dental coverage. So what will happen to things like dental coverage if the government falls?
I can feel my soul leaving my body as we recap this again. I understand why you might want to frame a process story, a fairly boring political process story, around potential lost entitlements, because the theory might have been essentially viewers will watch it.
Well, yeah, exactly. Like, most viewers aren't that engaged in political process stories, but most viewers are engaged in, like, well, shit, what am I going to lose? What about my goodies? You know what I mean? So the framing around the entitlements made sense to me, but it wasn't done very deftly. It wasn't done well. And then this was compounded by the fact, and now we have lots of information to show this from CTV side, that this was included in this package was a clip from a scrum that Pierre Poilievre did. There was a technical error with a machine called the Degero. The scrum wasn't recorded appropriately. The editor was on deadline. He panicked, and he basically spliced together a clip to do a really, really short sentence to the effect of getting Pierre to say, and that's why we have to call an election, instead of something to the effect of, and that's why we're calling a carbon tax election. So it was a combination of poor or sort of incompetent framing, technical error, a wrong decision to try and fix the technical error through bad splicing. That should never have been done. That should never have been done, and that was I think a violation of the typical journalistic principles in any concept. So, no question here that CTV screwed up. I think that where we started to put on the brakes here was when we saw that the Conservatives were overreacting to it. Like, it wasn't hard for us as people who've lived in journalism for decades now. It wasn't hard for us to understand how this mistake could get made without it being explained by malice or even necessarily anti-conservative bias.
It was all too easy for me to understand how that mistake happens.
Right? Which is not, it's not meant as an excuse for CTV. It's not meant as a justification. They fucked up. They did. And to be honest with you, I think that reprimand was justified in this case. They screwed up. And I think that the Conservatives' initial response to the screw up was very professional. Like, the party's spokesperson went on Twitter with a big formal complaint explaining why the clip had been doctored and errored. And that was, I thought, totally above board fine. However, after that, things got really out of control because the Conservatives used this to buttress their persecution complex, which is they have one, and that also buttressed their sort of worldview, which is all Canadian media is biased against us and is out to get us. And here, finally, we have evidence that they're doctoring clips and engaging in misinformation to make us look bad.
It's
and
the
we're like,
hardest thing to do is to tell someone to think vindicates them, doesn't.
Yeah.
It's it's almost psychologically impossible to do that.
It's psychologically impossible. And then, of course, Pierre took it all the way to 11 and started inferring that this was some kind of conspiracy by the Bell CEO to try and make, inference from his own tweets, and again, it's an inference here, was the Bell CEO was trying to make him look bad in order to get access to the Liberals' media money, which is so batshit nuts that I don't even know where to begin with it. Like, to start with the fact that I think what was Bell's corporate last take was in $13 billion. Like, it was a multi-billion-dollar revenue haul. Like the Bell parent company is a huge company that hires or employs 45,000 people in this country. CTV and the Bell media
this is
side
a
of it.
Bell revenue generator on my wrist.
Yeah, exactly.
And there's millions of Canadians just like me.
Yeah, like the Bell's media branch is a very, very small component in a very large cog there. And frankly, the media branch, I believe, is losing money. It's a liability. Like, Bell would drop their entire media arm in an instant if they could. They would drop every newscast in an instant if they could. The reason why they're stringing along these skeleton staffs of the CTV news channels at this point is because they need to do this in order to meet their regulatory broadcast licensing requirements. So, the idea that the Bell CEO, multi-billion-dollar Bell CEO, head of a nation of tens of thousands, is calling down to the junior editing suite at CTV News to slightly jiggle a story about why the Conservatives want a confidence vote.
It's the persecution complex, and you'll never be able to convince the Conservatives it's not true because they're convinced they are persecuted, and therefore everything that happens to them fits the pattern of persecution.
Yeah. Anyway, I realize nobody's going to believe us on this because we're part of the...
That's okay. If we keep it up, we'll win them all over eventually. Third time's a charm.
Anyway, point being is that we're only bringing this up again because it was very important, apparently, to call the vice president of CTV News into a parliamentary subcommittee meeting for the ethics parliamentary committee. Asked him to come in to answer for the misdeeds of these two now fired journalists.
Fired or removed? I don't know.
That was confirmed in the news stories. He testified at committee that they weren't just moved; they were terminated. They are not working for any other element within CTV.
I hadn't seen that.
Okay, so firstly, Richard Gray was the guy who did the testimony, and I think that it's fair to say that the testimony wasn't great. He probably had not taken it as seriously as I think a lot of the people there would have liked him to have taken it. He didn't, for example, grill his employees as to whether or not this was malicious. But his version of the events more or less matches what we understood happened, that it wasn't a malicious fuck up. It was a fuck up, but it wasn't some kind of anti-conservative conspiracy that went to the top. It was no, they framed a process story clumsily, and this was compounded by a technical error that botched the clip. And there was editorial mistakes made as a result of that, but there wasn't evidence of malice. So Gray probably didn't do a good enough job to try and get to the root of what was in the hearts of the now fired journalists. And look, I think that, to me,
he did not stare deeply into their eyes.
He did not stare deeply into their eyes. I think this is getting ridiculous. This is ridiculous now.
It was ridiculous from day two.
It was ridiculous.
We're 2 weeks into this, and we're calling the guy to testify before Parliament at an era whereas our first segment of the show will remind viewers that we face very real national security threats that the government is completely incapable of handling. let's carve out a few moments to hassle the CTV News VP.
Who's just fired 2 of his reporters over this, or 2 of his staff over this. I mean, look, there's nothing that will destroy your faith in democracy in this country than having to testify at a committee meeting. And as someone who's testified,
watching it.
Yeah, no, like, and I've testified at several committee meetings over various issues. Committees should be the place where people can, for a second, put the partisan brainworms aside and actually address serious issues. Like, they're supposed to be the place, okay, the House is going to be a shit show. The House, everybody's trying to get clips. A committee should be a place where people could be like, okay, now we're adults and we're going to debate the pros and cons of this bill, or we're going to have a conversation about what the potential unintended consequences. That's not what happens at committee anymore. Committees are
we're going to drop F-bombs on each other and hassle the guy from CTV.
Committees are a joke. Committees are 100% partisan theater, point scoring nonsense. They're not befitting an actual democratic process at this point. They're just not. The Americans do committee meetings better than us now. I'm not kidding. Americans, are that aspect of their democracy is functional and more adult than what we are doing now. It's so bad. It's such a joke. But the fact that, okay, so the CTV screw up, that's a legitimate one-day story. It's maybe a legitimate 2-day story. You all lost the plot by day 3. We're now 3 weeks in and you're now calling Richard Gray to testify at Parliament over a DeGero fuck up.
Well, that's just the intermediate step before convening the International Tribunal, who will have subpoena power and will deploy the black helicopters.
Serious problems in this country. Serious problems. We have law and order issues.
Peacekeepers to the CTV editing suite.
We have no industrial policy. Our entire federal government is sclerotic and incompetent and can't function at a basic level.
Our cheese is very expensive.
Like, I can name 5 major problems that this future conservative government is going to need to deal with the second it takes power. Serious problems. And your answer to this is, but we're going to get revenge against the CBC and cut the fucking carbon tax. We have no national defense. We have no military. Our global affairs situation is a joke, and increasingly becoming an obvious international joke. That department probably needs to be burned to the ground and rebuilt. We're about to go into another tumultuous period.
The healthcare system wants to uncouple people from their family doctors because they have to ration the family doctors.
We're effectively defederating, before our very eyes. But you know what? The most important thing here is that you're going to defund the CBC and turn their headquarters into condos. That'll fix it. Our entire housing policy is a catastrophe. We can't necessarily cut immigration without dealing with the demographic problems that we have in this country. We can't build houses fast enough to house the immigrants we need to bring in to keep the fucking lights on. Oh, and the overexpensive housing of this country has led to like a generational productivity and innovation collapse. But no, you defund the CBC. Do it. That'll fix it. I'm going to fix everything. Sorry, I need to throw a coffee mug at my computer when I start talking about this shit. I get so pissed off.
I would advise you not to do that, but I think we all have newfound sympathy for why Nate ended up F-bombing the committee. We're all feeling the pressure.
On that note, that's all I have to say about this anymore.
Yep. No, and honestly, my meta theme that stitches all 3 things together here. The conservatives understand that their political self-interest is best served by a fast election. Look to any non-conservative. I understand you want to delay the conservative victory. That's your short-term incentive. But I'm asking you all, I'm begging you all, look at what's happening in our committees. Look at what our foreign affairs minister is reportedly telling Tom Mulcair. Look at how adrift the Liberals are. Are any of you well served by this going on another month, 6 months, 12 months? And on that note, like and subscribe.
subscribe.
So this is either going to be the lighthearted segment, or it's going to be the existentially despairing segment, and I honestly don't know which one it's going to be. Jen threw...
We're very fun here at The Line. We're very fun.
Yeah, we're great at parties. Jen threw a really interesting idea at me earlier, and I think I'm going to quibble with how she phrases it, but only a little bit. So without further ado, I'm just going to turn the microphone over to Jen here. Jen, you threw an idea at me earlier. What was the idea?
Okay, so this was based on reading Marsha Lederman's column in the Globe today. She sort of appears to be, or the tone that it's giving off is someone who's just completely at a total loss to understand how someone like John Runstad, who's probably going to be the next premier of British Columbia at this rate, I don't know, but he's at the head of the...
Chance.
He's got a fighting chance. He's the head of effectively the small c Conservative Party that just merged with previous Conservative Party. I won't get into all that. But he's the head of the now Conservative Party in the province, looking to take out David Eby, who's the head of the NDP. And she just is, Marsha, that is just clearly just at a total loss to understand how someone who's this Looney Tunes could get this far in a Canadian political context. And she lists a couple of his examples. For example, apparently in the debate, John said something to the effect of, I saw someone die of an overdose on the streets, and this got fact-checked. Apparently there was a guy overdosing in the streets, but he didn't die. And then Runstad had to come back and say, I'm saying Runstad. Is Runstad or Rustad?
Runstad.
Okay. I'm terrible with names. I'm a print reporter. Like, nobody expects me to...
BC's far away. We're jihad.
It's true. So anyway, Runstad comes out and says, well, I'm really overjoyed to hear that he didn't die, blah, 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 blah. And Marsha was at a loss for this. She was also kind of shocked by the fact that Runstad seems to be a climate change denier. So I'm just going to quote from her column right here. He recently asked an interviewer, Jordan Peterson, a whole other story, quote, how is it that we've convinced carbon-based beings that carbon is a problem? Quote, taxing people into poverty in some vain attempt to change the weather is absolute lunacy. Okay, so I interpret a quote like that as climate change denial. We're not talking about weather. Obviously, we're talking about climate. Obviously, humans are also made of water, but trust me, what will tell you...
Stick your head in a fucking lake and hold it there for 5 minutes and tell me how that goes.
Yeah, exactly. So, that's just... It's obviously a really stupid quote. It's not smart. There's a couple other examples she pulls out. But this all kind of has me asking two questions. One, how necessary or how sane do we need a provincial premier to be? And two, I'm wondering someone like Marsha is horrified that someone could be this lunatic or this crazy in politics. I'm kind of wondering whether or not crazy is an asset in politics.
Yeah.
So firstly, this is where I give Runstad the benefit of the doubt here.
I looked it up, by the way. It's not Run, it's Russ.
Oh,
Rustad.
Oh, see, I apologize to everyone.
No, I'm with you, though. I wanted to put an N into that, too, and I don't know why.
I don't know. Okay, I apologize to Mr. Rustad. I apologize for mispronouncing. But the problem is that I'm a print reporter by training. Neither of us have training in writing, and the end result is we don't actually have very good discipline when it comes to pronunciation, and especially not pronunciation of names. That's actually something that radio and TV reporters do actually train for, and we just don't. So I apologize.
We just need to get the spelling right.
We just need to get the spelling right. I get the spelling right. Anyway, so I apologize. Rustad. Okay, so back to my point. Does it matter if a premier of British Columbia believes in climate change? Does it actually matter? Does it matter if your local mayor gives a shit about climate change? I think I'm gonna make a counterintuitive argument. I'm not sure that it does. I'm not sure that it matters a whole lot whether or not, especially local politicians, adhere to the same even consensus reality in a lot of points as we would expect of other types of politicians. Like, I think it matters a hell of a lot if the US president believes in climate change. I think it matters a hell of a lot if Xi Jinping depends on climate change. I think it matters a hell of a lot if Modi believes in climate change. I think it matters some as to how serious a leader of a G7 country like Canada believes in climate change. I think it can be influential. We can take a moral leadership role in the world there. But the premier of a province?
It's a really interesting question that I don't have a good answer for, because I know what you mean. And climate change is the example we're using, but I think it's a bigger question than climate change.
I'm using this as an example, yeah.
Could be anything, basically, like any wildly abnormal or conspiratorial view. What is the lowest level of governmental responsibility where it ceases to matter?
I need the premier of my province to be an effective administrator of the healthcare system, to be an effective administrator of the education system, to be an effective administrator of the civil service that operates within that system. If I think that his beliefs are impinging his ability to function in those roles, like, for example, if I think that if John Runstead or his government, if John Runstead and his government were to want to indoctrinate the children in his provincial education system into not believing in climate change or to having conspiratorial worldviews, then I think that matters a lot, because now we're crossing the line. But provided that he is an effective administrator of the things that are under his responsibility, do we need all of these leaders to toe the same line on major issues? Even, you know what I mean? It's an interesting question.
So I've got a lot of things I'm going to say in response to this, and it's going to be a little scattershot. But one of the things we've experienced in modern times is, there's probably a better term for it than this, but I would call it the collapse of privacy. Mm-hmm. Because of things like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, et cetera, we're constantly exposed to more of each other's personal lives than we normally would be, or that we historically would have been. Mm-hmm. You and I have been friends and colleagues for well over a decade. So I've met your husband. I know your kids. But we didn't start that way. There's a process of time where you get to know someone. And in the modern era, you click on someone's Facebook page and you suddenly, instead of having we met at this thing, but then we got to know each other over the next 5 years, it's sort of like, here is a checklist of every political and artistic and cultural view that they have. Mm-hmm. The normal bounds of privacy have been collapsed. And I think that has made it hard for us to function as a society. Because 30 years ago, all you really need to know about your neighbor was that he kept his lawn in good order and that he would help you with your trash bins and he'd keep an eye on your house when you're out of town. Now you know that about your neighbor, but if also your buddy's on Facebook, you also see the weird shit he shares. The anti-Semitic shit, or the anti-Palestine shit, or the, et cetera, et cetera. There was a nice moderating buffer of privacy for most of human existence, and we have, in one generation, collapsed it. And I know that sounds a little bit afield of all this, but the reason it came to mind is, do I need to know, or should I care about what my school board trustee thinks about the Holocaust? What interest do I as a citizen have in knowing whether or not, we were talking about chemtrails last week. Mm-hmm. Do I care if a municipal bylaw enforcement officer believes in chemtrails? And I think on those issues, I would say no. I care about performance. And if they're doing their job well, and they also believe that the king is an android, I don't care.
Just so long as they had their own critical thinking capacity. Well, good at the job, but also as long as their own critical thinking capacity hasn't degraded their ability to be good at the job.
Then you start to scale that up. So we're thinking about the local dog catcher, the trash man, the guy writing parking tickets. I think at a certain point, I do start to worry if people are crazy, but I don't know where that point is. And on an issue like climate change or Holocaust denial, I'm thinking of all these different things that are trans rights issues, right? I'm trying to think of things that have been recently politically polarizing. Where's the cutoff between this person is too junior for us to give a shit, and no, believing these things is an indictment on your overall fitness to lead?
Yeah.
I don't know. I wish I had a better answer, but I don't know if a provincial premier is someone that I'm going to care about. One of the interesting things is we live in an era of purity tests, right? Where ideological partisans in whatever silo they're in, they want to know, I don't care how good you are at fundraising or community or being a community activist. I don't care what your legislative agenda is. Here is a checklist of 18 things people in this party must passionately believe. Oh, you only tick 17 of these boxes. Fuck you. You're not one of us.
Well, and the other thing I would say is, do you think that leaders in the past didn't have crazy ass ideas?
That maybe absolutely
that simply
read a presidential biography.
Yeah, exactly. Like
the Secretary of War effectively led the army through the crisis and was holding seances for his squirrels.
I'm 100% convinced that like Ralph Klein had some lunatic ideas, but he was able to govern it in an era where he firstly didn't necessarily need to explain what his personal beliefs were on every single subject in order to pass some kind of purity test. And also at the same time, that was okay, as long as he did the job that was allotted to him correctly and appropriately, and that was the measure by which we judged him. Something has changed here, that we've moved into bridging these purity tests down further and further down. And I think climate change is a useful one, and I think it's an important one, because I think it's like there is no policy that BC can pass or not pass that's going to make a difference on global climate change. We as a country, we as a nation, we as a province, whatever, can demonstrate that we are good global citizens who are taking good moral and demonstrating good moral leadership on the issue. And I think that's appropriate. I think that is appropriate. But like, our policies don't make a difference in the long run.
Yeah.
So we are in the realm of purity testing here. We're not, and this is why I think there's a different thing to hold. I don't necessarily think that holding John Rustad to the same standard as the U.S. president is a reasonable position, because if a U.S. president doesn't believe in climate change, that means that you are far more likely to see federal U.S. policies that will damage the planet at scale. That's not so true if we're talking about a provincial premier. And I think that the boundary of expectation shifts in line with the boundary of responsibility is sort of where my option would be. The other thing I would just say is, like, when it comes to the Rustad getting shit for saying that he saw a guy overdose in the street and wrongly saying that he died and he didn't die. Has BC so fucking normalized overdoses on the street that that's a controversy? Yes.
And I think Rustad's trying to denormalize
and
them,
I think that's, and also bluntly, I think he's right. It's not normal, whether or not the guy died or not. It's not normal to be seeing people overdose on the street. That's not normal.
The purity, yes, or it shouldn't be, but it might be.
That shouldn't be normal.
The purity test, one element of this is interesting, right? Because some purity tests are internal. Some of them are, like I said before, if you want to belong to the Matt and Jen party, here are the 18 things you must believe passionately, and 17 out of 18 ain't good enough. But there's also the purity test we impose on our opponents. So I think with a guy like Rustad, and again, we'll stick with the climate change example, there are going to be people who would never vote for Rustad who will consider his views on climate change disqualifying. And they will say that it is a lack of moral leadership, it is a lack of intellectual fitness, or a lack of critical thinking. But what I think is happening is, and I told you before I was going to disagree with you a little bit, and I'm going to disagree with you in a minute because this is relevant. I think what's happening is that when we impose the purity tests on our others, what we are doing is incentivizing our tribe to reject the purity tests of the others. So it's like, oh, these fuckers had their 18 things. I put a big X next to all 18 of them.
Yeah, even if it's not reasonable to do so. Yes.
And the question that you have phrased it, well, first of all, to complete my thought, I keep trying to warn my progressive friends that you are creating some of this trans backlash, because you are making it an advantage for a conservative politician to seek a maximalist stand, not a nuanced one.
Yeah.
And I don't like, it's blowback, right? Like people don't seem to understand that physics applies in politics and every action has an equal and opposite reaction.
Well, and I said the idea that it's only those guys playing politics, I'm just being the rational one here. I mean, no, you're both playing politics here.
Yeah.
You're both engaging in this game and you're reacting to and off of one another.
Yes. You asked the question, is there like an advantage in being crazy? I'm going to answer that yes and no. Yes, because I think some of the political communication of the 21st century has become so stilted. Someone can show up and it's going to be like, we're going to fix the schools, we're going to hire more family doctors, we're going to clean up the streets. I live in a haunted house, and we're going to reform the bail system. And people will grab on to I live in a haunted house as a signal of authenticity.
Yeah, I think that's
and it's
right.
because our politics is so inauthentic that someone who is prepared to freely express one batshit crazy thing
seems real, seems more real.
So I think
it's a marketing strategy.
And I don't know if people are therefore incentivized to say one crazy thing. You know, Kamala Harris, in some of the recent interviews she's been doing in the United States, has been drawing attention to the fact that she owns a handgun. And it's kind of like she feels like she has to say one surprising thing. And that's not the same thing as saying I talk to ghosts, or I have I have seances with my dead grandparents or whatever, something like that. But I think all the politicians are aware of the fact that they all talk and sound the same. They might say different things, but the tone and the presentation is basically the same. And I think then a guy like Donald Trump shows up and says, I'm going to grab her by the pussy and we're going to send all the immigrants back. And tens of millions of Americans don't even think about that, but they're like, well, he sounds different. And I'm sick of those fuckers.
And those fuckers haven't done anything for me, and so everything's going to shit.
I like the guy who sounds different. So is crazy,
but it's not even different. It's like he sounds like he's telling the truth
because he sounds different,
and he sounds like he's being real.
Yeah. So yeah, think of Pierre Poilievre's slogans, right? Like it's going to be like, we're going to axe the tax, build the homes, stop the crime, end the time travelers, and so on and so on. You throw in one thing, whether it's real crazy or not, and all of a sudden you sound authentic. But one of the things, and this is the only area I'm going to disagree with you on, and I'm not even convinced I disagree with you, but I had put the idea to you, is the superpower being crazy, or is the superpower being shameless? Because what I'm honestly wondering is if the advantage of the politician is not in believing the crazy thing, it's in not giving a shit about the blowback if you say the crazy thing. And
I think they're two different things.
I don't know what it is, but we have all watched a collapse in shame in our politics where, when Mayor John Tory, former Mayor John Tory of Toronto, when it was discovered by the Toronto Star that he had been engaged in an extramarital sexual affair with a younger woman who reported to him on his staff, he resigned. And I know John Tory and I like John Tory, and I know why John Tory felt that he should do that. Because he still had a sense of shame. And it didn't prevent him from doing the thing, but he still had that brainstem wiring of, I got caught doing a bad thing and I've lost the moral authority to lead. And when he did that, people almost couldn't believe it, because we live in an era where politicians are like, you're goddamn right, I was fucking my intern, and the hell with you. Yeah, I'm authentic. I'm gonna go say some bullshit stuff on Twitter, and people are gonna like me more. I don't know if the superpower is crazy or shamelessness. I think we're either way, but I don't know what it is.
Crazy and shameless are two different things.
They're kind of related though. Like if you're crazy, you might not think you should be ashamed.
Yeah, I mean they're related, but they're two different superpowers. I think they're different. They're different things. But I think what you're saying about the marketing appeal of throwing one crazy thing into the mix just to show people that you're like them, and you know what I think that also demonstrates? Everybody believes something crazy. Nobody's rational all the time. We all have our greedy. So if a politician comes up and says, well, I actually think this is kind of bullshit. Not only do you like that politician more because he's relatable to you now, because, oh shit, he kind of believes something crazy too. But also the fact that he's willing to be open enough and vulnerable enough to share that crazy with you creates a human connection in a really interesting way. Well, it also serves as sort of a branding definition, sort of a branding distinction.
I remember back in like 2007, the young senator from Illinois, Obama spoke so differently in tone from politicians that he sounded fascinating. Like the way he spoke, and I got me like at the time I was just kind of just starting my career, but I was still like I was politics obsessed. He sounded different than everyone else talking, and people listened to that because it was different. But the problem is, after Obama had been president for a couple of years, I realized that Obama also had one very typical scripted move. Every Obama speech sounds like this. Like he had this low, high, low tonal thing going on that was very different than John McCain or Mitt Romney. But Obama only had the low, high, low thing. And I'm not saying what he said didn't matter, but how he said it was what he got attention for. That doesn't work anymore. You want to get attention right now, you got to go out. We're going to build the homes, fix the crime, cut the tax, stop the time travelers, and hire the doctors or whatever, right? Like you almost have to say one crazy thing to sound authentic. And that's not an indictment fundamentally of the person saying the crazy thing. It's the indictment of all the people out there who sound so fucking the same about everything all the goddamn time. Like,
well, also the degree to which we've lost faith in anything that our political system at all to produce anything resembling honesty or results. Everything gets reduced to memes and comms, right? It's like, if I've totally lost any faith in my political system to actually deliver improved outcomes or build anything, then what's left but the game? It's nothing. It's just a game then. It's sports. We might as well have a podcast talking about hockey because it doesn't really matter.
I wouldn't rule out a line hockey podcast.
Hockey.
What? Yeah. No, and like I said, this could get existentially dark, but I think one of the reasons we're going to see a federal election campaign, there's just going to be vicious wedges. The issues are not going to be trust us to do these important things for you. The issues are going to be don't vote for that fucking asshole.
Yeah.
When you lose the ability to rally people to your cause. And I don't know how the conservatives are going to campaign. I'm getting my first sense of what their campaign blitz is going to look like whenever the writ eventually drops. But I think for the liberals, they're gonna have some token Sunny Ways vibes things. But the campaign is going to be a vote for Poilievre is a vote for back alley abortions and AR-15s in every classroom. And like I get it, like I know what brought them there, but I don't. You know what? For Poilievre, to his credit, he's actually remarkably scripted. Like. Poilievre goes into a diner. It's like, I'll get the 3-egg special. How do you want your eggs? We're going to build the homes. Someone quipped about Poilievre, and I wish I remember who it was. The Poilievre's election campaign is going to be verbing the noun. And I can't unhear that, but he actually is, to his credit, ruthlessly on message. How long until winning elections basically becomes contests of who will say the most batshit thing imaginable to win the authenticity battle?
Like when I criticized the conservatives in the last segment, please don't believe that I fail to acknowledge for 1 second that these guys are great at politics. I give them absolute full credit at being very, very good at politics, and increasingly very, very good at comms. Like that. They're great at this. They're really, really good. They're much better than the liberals. And it's been a very long time since that's been true. It's my concern is not their ability to win an election or be good at the politics part. They're fantastic at that.
I don't think the Liberals are going to know what hit them because
I
they're
think that's
still
right.
stuck in their headset of what that is not our fault is responsible for our problems.
Failed theory of the case, man. So anyway, that's all I have to say this week, and I think we've gone on.
That was less depressing than I was expecting.
Oh, we're charming. We're charming people.
Yes, and I have a new shiny background.
So. It's very shiny. On that note, like and subscribe to The Line. If you have not already, do check us out at www.readtheline.ca. All of our stuff gets posted to our Substack newsletter. That is where you will find us. Also, it's where you are most likely to be able to successfully yell at us because we have all of our stuff goes beyond, all of our comment section are available only to paid subscribers. So if you want to write in a comment section that Matt or I have a high probability of reading, that's where to go. Not that we don't occasionally pop in here in YouTube or in some other comment sections as well, but we got to do what we can to entice you to pay for the line.
Readtheline.ca. Reminder, folks, this is programming note, no written dispatch this weekend. This will be the last to hear from us until next week. You know what's incredible though, Jen? A month ago, 5 weeks ago, we had no op-eds coming in. We have 5 unedited pieces that we're going to roll out next week because after Labor Day, people get back to work. So we got lots of great written content coming your way soon, but
which I've
nothing over the long weekend.
And I'm literally going to write my column after lunch. So that's my plan today. So there you go. And actually, it's going to be a good one. It's going to be a good one. It's going
to be a banger of a column.
It's going to be a banger. No, that's going to be good. All right. Cheers. Love you all.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Today's podcast was brought to you by Unsmoke Canada. Now is the time to modernize Canadian laws so that adult smokers have information and access to better alternatives. By doing so, we can create lasting change. Learn more at unsmoke.ca.